Get out of my operating room. You don't belong in here. I was called in, Dr. Harmon. God, Dr. Harmon called in nobody like you. You look like you wandered in off the street. Guy, I'll stay out of your way, sir. Guy, you'll stay out of my hospital. Security. And then the doors opened. The man who walked through them had flown in from Washington that morning. He had not announced himself. He had not called ahead. He simply walked into Mercy General the way a man walks into a room he built with his own hands, because he had. Nobody in that corridor had any idea. Go back 2 hours. The night shift at Mercy General Teaching Hospital had a particular kind of quiet to it, not peaceful, just held. The kind of quiet that could crack at any second. The East Wing smelled like floor wax and recycled air. The fluorescent lights above the nurses' station buzzed at a frequency that everyone pretended not to notice. A resident named Holt had been awake for 19 hours and was running on vending machine coffee and spite. Lena walked in at 6:58, 2 minutes before her consult was scheduled, wearing scrubs she'd bought at a thrift store in 2019 and a pair of worn New Balance shoes that had seen better decades. Her badge was clipped to her collar, but she hadn't bothered to flip it face out. She didn't think she'd need it. She stopped at the nurse's station first. The overnight charge nurse, a woman named Patrice who had worked that desk for 11 years, looked up and exhaled like someone had just lifted a weight off her. "Dr. Calloway," Patrice said quietly. "Thank God. How's the family? My mother's doing better. The physical therapy is helping? Good." Lena touched her arm once, just briefly. "I'll check in before I leave. What are we looking at tonight?" Patrice walked her through it, a 63-year-old post-cardiac arrest who wasn't responding the way the attending expected. Lena listened without interrupting, nodding twice, asking one question about the potassium levels. Patrice answered, and Lena was already moving down the hall. She knew the name of the janitor mopping the far end of the corridor. She'd learned it 8 months ago and hadn't forgotten. She asked about his son's scholarship. "Got it," he said, grinning wide. "Full ride. I told you," Lena said without breaking stride. "Kid's got your brains." She made it to the cardiac ward at 7 on the dot. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Dr. Elliot Harmon had arrived 20 minutes earlier. Harmon ran the cardiothoracic surgery department at Mercy General. He had held that position for 14 years, which meant he had spent 14 years being the most important person in every room he entered. He had the handshake of a man accustomed to being thanked. He wore his title the way other men wore expensive watches, not to tell time, but to be seen. He was standing outside the patient's room when Lena turned the corner. He had 2 residents flanking him, a med student hovering 3 steps back trying to be invisible, and the look of a man who had already decided how the next hour was going to go. His eyes moved over Lena the way Gerald Anderson's had moved over Grace at that gala. The same flat assessment, the same conclusion drawn before a single word was spoken. "Excuse me," he said, not kindly, the way you say it to someone standing in your way. "This is a restricted unit. I know. I have a consult." Lena reached for her badge. "A consult?" He said it like she'd said something slightly absurd. "Sent by whom?" "Dr. Reyes in cardiology. 7 o'clock." Harmon looked at the residents. One of them shrugged slightly. He looked back at Lena, at her thrift store scrubs, her worn shoes, her badge still flipped inward, and made a decision about her in the space of 3 seconds. "I don't know what Dr. Reyes told you," he said, "but we have this under control. You can head back to wherever you came from." Lena looked at him steadily. "I'd like to see the chart first, Dr. Harmon." His eyebrows lifted. He wasn't used to that. "I'm sorry. Do you know who I am? You run cardiothoracic here." 14 years. She said it without inflection. "I've read your work on minimally invasive valve repair, the 2019 paper in JAMA. It was good." Something flickered across his face. Not softened, recalibrated. He covered it fast. "Then you know I don't need a second opinion. The potassium is off and the patient's QRS is widening." She said it quietly, not performing, just stating. "That combination at this stage of recovery concerns me. I'd like to see the chart." A long pause. "Who are you?" he said. "Lena Calloway." The name landed in the air between them and didn't mean anything to him, which told her everything she needed to know about how this next hour was going to go. "Well, Lena," he said, smiling in the way that wasn't a smile, "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this is a teaching institution with a chain of command, and you're not in it." He turned back to his residence. Done with her. Lena stood still. She had been here before. "Not this hospital." Not this hallway, but this moment. Someone deciding what she was based on what she looked like, and turning away before she could be anything else. She breathed through it. "Dr. Harmon," she said, and her voice was very calm. "With respect. What happens to this patient in the next 4 hours is going to depend on what decision gets made in the next 4 minutes." He turned back, slowly, the way powerful men turn when they want to make clear they're choosing to. "Are you threatening me right now? In my department? I'm telling you about a patient. You're not cleared to be in this unit. Then look at my badge and clear me." He didn't move. He just looked at her clothes, her shoes, her stillness, and his lip curled in a way that he probably didn't realize was visible to the 2 residents standing behind him, both of whom had gone very still. "I don't know who referred you or why," he said, each word precise and deliberate, the kind of precision that was meant to feel like a blade, "but I will tell you what I see. I see someone who walked into the wrong floor of the wrong hospital in the wrong decade. Cardiology consults in this department come through me, through my office, through my approval, not through some walk-in who showed up looking like she's between shifts at a county clinic." Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped. A nurse wheeled a cart past without looking up. One of the residents, a young woman named Dr. Chu, dropped her gaze to the floor. The other one, a man, studied the wall. The med student had stopped breathing entirely. Lena didn't flinch. Something behind her eyes went very quiet. It was the quiet of someone who had learned long ago that anger spent in a hallway was anger wasted. "May I see the chart?" she said. "No," Harmon said. "You may leave." She didn't leave. She pulled out her phone, sent a message in 3 words, and slid it back into her pocket. Harmon watched that and laughed, short and dismissive. "Who are you texting? Your supervisor?" "I am the supervisor." "I know," Lena said. "Then act like it." He pointed toward the elevator bank. "I won't ask again." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Dr. Chu's career. Harmon made his rounds. He talked loudly the way men talk when they want a room to know they're in charge. He corrected the med student on a drug interaction that the student had actually gotten right. He told the overnight nurse her documentation was insufficient, which it was not. He held court. Lena sat in the small waiting area adjacent to the nurse's station. She didn't leave, she just sat, hands folded, watching the monitor screen above the desk that showed the patient's vitals. Patrice brought her a cup of coffee without being asked. "You don't have to stay," Patrice said quietly. "I know," Lena said. "How long has he been like this?" Patrice looked at her carefully. 14 years, she said. They didn't say anything else. At 7:34, the patient's monitor alarmed. It was the QRS, exactly what Lena had flagged 40 minutes earlier. The nurse on duty responded in seconds. Harmon came out of the dictation room at a jog, the residents behind him, suddenly all business, the performance of authority replaced by the real thing. He assessed the patient, issued orders. The team moved, and then he stopped, because the chart on the rolling stand beside the bed showed an annotation, a note added at 7:11 nearly half an hour ago, a clear, precise clinical observation about the potassium interaction and the widening QRS, with a differential and a recommended intervention. The note was signed, Dr. Lena Calloway, MD, PhD, Chief of Cardiovascular Medicine, Johns Hopkins Medical Center, Consulting Surgeon, National Institutes of Health Cardiac Task Force Board Chair, American College of Cardiology. Harmon read it. He read it again. The resident to his left watched his face and later said it looked like a man watching the floor open under him. He looked up. Lena was standing in the doorway of the patient's room, calm as she'd been all night, still in the same worn shoes. "The potassium needs to come up by 0.4 before you touch that medication," she said simply. "If you adjust the drip now, you've got about a 20-minute window before the rhythm stabilizes. I'd move quickly." Harmon stood very still. The resident, Dr. Chu, was already moving, pulling the chart, reading the note. The med student had gone the color of the white wall. "That's—" Harmon started. "Yes," Lena said. She waited. He didn't apologize. The moment stretched out, all of them aware of it, and Harmon did what men like him do when the ground shifts. He pivoted. He moved toward the patient, issued orders that happened to mirror exactly what Lena had written in her note, and called them his own, without looking at her again. The resident caught Lena's eye over his shoulder, an apology in a glance. Lena gave her a small nod. Not absolution, just acknowledgement. The patient stabilized over the next 18 minutes. The team worked well once Harmon stopped being the obstacle and started being the surgeon. Lena stayed in the doorway and watched and did not speak unless spoken to. When it was over, Harmon walked out past her without a word. The med student, a young man named Braden who had been awake since 4 a.m. and who would remember this night for the rest of his career, lingered near the door. "Dr. Calloway," he said very quietly. "I'm sorry for what he said to you." Lena looked at him. He was maybe 25, still soft around the eyes, still in the phase of medicine where he believed the hierarchy was rational. "Don't be sorry," she said. "Be the doctor who notices when it happens. There's a difference." He nodded like he was memorizing it. She went back to the nurse's station to sign her documentation. That was when the administrator appeared. His name was Garrett Wyndham. He was the chief operating officer of Mercy General, which meant he controlled budgets, department heads, and his own sense of self-importance in roughly equal measure. He was 53, silver at the temples in the precise way that read as distinguished rather than aged, and he wore the expression of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that looking disappointed was more powerful than looking angry. He came out of the elevator at 7:56 and went straight to Harmon's side. They knew each other the way men at the top of institutions know each other, not as friends but as mutual investments. "I heard there was a disruption," Wyndham said, not looking at Lena. "On this floor resolved," Harmon said, also not looking at Lena. "Good." Wyndham adjusted his cuffs. "We have a very important visitor arriving in." He glanced at his phone. "Any moment. I'd like the department to present well." Harmon straightened slightly. "Who is it?" "Dr. Calloway." Wyndham said the name with significance, clearly expecting a reaction. A pause. "Who?" Harmon said. "Lena Calloway, chair of the Hopkins Cardiovascular Department. She's on the NIH task force reviewing hospital performance standards nationwide. She was supposed to arrive tomorrow." Wyndham looked slightly stressed. "But her office called an hour ago. She came a day early, unannounced." He finally looked toward the nurse's station, toward the woman in the worn scrubs signing a chart. His expression changed. "That's her," Patrice said helpfully from behind her desk, with an air of absolute serenity. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Wyndham walked toward Lena with the speed of a man who has just realized he is standing in the wrong place in a photograph. Harmon followed 2 steps behind, and for the first time that night, he looked genuinely uncertain of where his feet should go. "Dr. Calloway," Wyndham said. His voice had found a register that it hadn't used in the previous 5 minutes, warm, respectful, with just enough deference to make clear he understood the architecture of power and had revised his position within it. This is such an honor. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "I know," Lena said. She didn't look up from the chart immediately. Finished the sentence she was writing. Then she capped her pen and looked at him. "I like to see hospitals the way they really are," she said, "before anyone has time to prepare." Wyndham's smile did something complicated. Of course. I hope your evening has been. I hope you found everything in order." He glanced at Harmon. The look was sharp and sideways and carried the message clearly. "What did you do?" Harmon had gone still with the particular stillness of a man realizing he has made a very specific and very visible mistake in front of a very specific and very visible audience. Lena looked at him. He met her eyes for the first time since he'd read her credentials on that chart. "Dr. Harmon," she said, "the patient in 7 East is going to need close monitoring through the morning. I've documented the intervention points. I'd appreciate a follow-up report by 9 a.m. It was not a request." "Of course," he said. His voice had lost its edge entirely. Without it, he sounded older. "Thank you." She turned back to Wyndham. "I'll need a meeting with department heads tomorrow at 8, she said. "Cardiology, cardiothoracic, and your nursing leadership. I have some observations from tonight I'd like to discuss." Wyndham nodded so quickly it was almost graceless. "Absolutely. Whatever you need. I'll have my assistant. We'll have everything arranged. I'd also like a word with your security protocols," she said. "Specifically, the process by which credentialed visiting physicians are cleared onto restricted units." The pause that followed lasted about 2 full seconds, which, in a hospital hallway at 8 in the morning, is a very long time. "Yes," Wyndham said. "Of course." Lena closed the chart. She nodded once at Patrice. Patrice nodded back with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been waiting patiently for a specific moment and had just watched it arrive. Lena started toward the elevator. She had walked about 12 feet when she heard the footsteps behind her. Quick ones. She knew who they belonged to before she turned. Harmon caught up at the elevator bank. He looked like a man who had rehearsed something on the walk over and lost his nerve halfway through. Dr. Calloway. He stopped, looked at her shoes for just a moment, the way you look at a thing when you're trying not to look at it. I owe you an apology. She waited. What I said tonight. He cleared his throat. How I spoke to you. That was unprofessional and It was, she said. He stopped. He'd been expecting more, softening maybe, or an out. She didn't give him one. The patient's alive because someone caught what you missed, she said. It was not cruel. It was simply the truth, said plainly. The way she'd been saying true things plainly for 30 years in rooms full of people who wanted her to say them quietly or not at all. You have good instincts as a surgeon, Dr. Harmon. Tonight wasn't your best work. He stood there, a man who had run his department for 14 years, and right now he looked about 35, uncertain, caught. I'll do better, he said. Good, Lena said. That's all anyone can ask. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She pressed the lobby button. When the doors closed, she was already thinking about the patient in 7 East and the follow-up she needed to write before 8 a.m. She was not thinking about Harmon. She never gave men like him more thought than the situation required. That was a skill she had spent a long time learning. What she didn't know yet was that Dr. Chu had been texting her attending since 7:30, that the med student Braden had filmed 12 seconds of Harmon in the hallway, not the cruelty, just the dismissal, just enough, and sent it to a friend, that the friend had sent it to 2 people, that by the time Lena reached the lobby there were 47 people on a group message arguing about it. The internet moves faster than apologies. By noon, the clip was everywhere. It was short, shaky, caught on a phone held low near the nurse's station. Just Harmon's voice, his profile, and the words county clinic loud enough for any speaker to catch. Just 10 seconds. Just enough. The caption wrote itself. Chief of Surgery at Mercy General tells visiting physician to go back to the county clinic. Didn't know she chairs his department's accreditation review. The replies came in waves. First outrage, then recognition. This happens all the time. To nurses, to residents, to anyone who walks in without the right suit and the right pedigree. Then the deeper conversation that always sits under those stories, the one about who gets to walk into a room and be taken seriously before they prove they deserve it. Mercy General's social media team called an emergency meeting at 1 p.m. By 3, Harmon had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal review. The hospital's statement was careful and full of words like values and accountability and commitment, which is what hospital statements say when they mean the problem is being contained. What the statement didn't say, but everyone who worked on the 7th floor already knew. The NIH site review that Dr. Lena Calloway was conducting could affect Mercy General's federal funding for the next 5 years. The number attached to that funding had 7 digits. Garrett Wyndham had been on the phone with legal since 9 a.m. The review did not get cancelled. Lena had made no threats, issued no ultimatum. She had simply scheduled a meeting for 8 a.m. and asked for a report by 9. That calm was the most frightening thing about her, according to 3 different people who were interviewed about it later. She gave no interviews. She posted nothing. When a reporter called her office at Hopkins, her assistant said she was unavailable and would not be commenting on personnel matters at partner institutions. Her silence was its own kind of statement. The meeting the next morning was the most uncomfortable 40 minutes in recent memory for everyone seated around that conference table. Lena came in on time, sat down, opened her folder, and walked through her observations from the night before with the precision of someone who had been trained to notice the things hospitals preferred not to notice. She talked about credentialing protocol. She talked about how visiting physicians were received and processed on restricted units. She talked, at length and with specificity, about the documented correlation between dismissive treatment of female physicians in clinical settings and adverse patient outcomes, because when the surgeon who should be listening to a consult is too busy dismissing the consultant to hear the consult, patients die. She put a paper on the table, a study, her own. The nursing director read the abstract and went very quiet. Wyndham sat at the head of the table and nodded at everything she said with the expression of a man holding a very hot cup and trying not to show it. At the end, she closed her folder. "I'm not here to punish this hospital," she said. "I'm here because the work of this review matters, and Mercy General is capable of doing it well. What happened last night was one incident. What concerns me is whether it was one incident or one instance of a pattern. That's what the review will determine." She stood. "I'd like the nursing leadership to know," she added, looking directly at the director, "that Patrice, your overnight charge nurse, performed under significant pressure last night with exceptional professionalism. I'd like that noted formally." The director nodded quickly. Lena gathered her folder and walked out. In the hallway outside the conference room, Dr. Chu was waiting. She had not been in the meeting. She had no reason to be in this hallway except one. Lena stopped. "Dr. Chu," she said. The young resident looked up. She was holding her own folder, pressed against her chest like a shield. "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened last night, and I didn't. I should have said something. In the hallway. I didn't, and I've been thinking about it since, and I wanted to." "You reported it through proper channels," Lena said. "I know. Your attending told me." Chu blinked. "You knew?" "I know how hospitals work," Lena said simply. "Speaking up in that hallway would have cost you your residency position and changed nothing. Reporting it correctly with documentation, on the record, that's what actually matters." Chu was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think of it that way. Most people don't. They think courage is loud." Lena looked at her, taking a measure of something. "It usually isn't. It's usually just steady." She held out her card. Not her worn one, the one with the Hopkins logo and the title that Harmon would have recognized at 7 p.m. if he'd looked. "When you're done with your residency," Lena said, "call me." Chu took the card with both hands. Lena walked to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. The morning light came through the east-facing windows at the end of the hall, the kind of light that only hits exactly right for about 20 minutes, and right then it caught the whole corridor in something warm. The review continued for 3 days. Lena spent them moving through Mercy General the same way she'd moved through the 7th floor. Quietly, observantly, knowing every nurse's name by day 2, eating in the cafeteria at the same table as the orderlies because that's where the real information was, asking questions that didn't feel like interrogation because they weren't. At the end of the 3rd day, she filed a preliminary report. Mercy General was structurally sound. Good physicians. Overworked nurses. One department with a documented culture problem that had been allowed to calcify under a long-tenured chief who had mistaken longevity for infallibility. The recommendations were specific. Mandatory credentialing acknowledgement protocols for all incoming consultants, a revised patient safety reporting structure that removed department heads from the first line of complaint, annual implicit bias training that was actual training, and not a 40-minute online module with a quiz at the end. She wrote all of it clearly and left no room for interpretation. Then she drove to the airport in the same modest rental car she'd picked up Monday morning, returned it, and boarded a 6 a.m. flight back to Baltimore. She texted Patrice from the gate. Just 3 words. "Your mother's exercises." Patrice texted back a link to a physical therapy resource Lena had recommended, with a note. "Already sent her this. She's doing the ones you circled." Lena smiled once, put her phone away, and opened the journal article she'd been meaning to finish for 2 weeks. The seat next to her was empty. She didn't think about Harmon on the flight. She thought about the paper, about the patient in 7 East who had stabilized beautifully, about Dr. Chu. She thought about the med student, Braden, and whether he would become the doctor who noticed or the doctor who looked away. She thought there was a reasonable chance he'd be the former. He had that look, the one that costs you sleep, the one that makes you good. 3 weeks later, Harmon submitted his formal apology through the hospital's review process. It was thorough and correctly structured and arrived via legal counsel, which meant it had been drafted by someone else and reviewed by 3 people before he signed it. It was entered into the record. Lena read it once. She did not respond to it directly, because there was nothing left to say that the record didn't already say more clearly. Some apologies come too late to change what happened. The best they can do is change what comes next. Whether Harmon would change was his business. He'd been shown exactly who he was in a hallway on a Tuesday night, in front of residents and a med student and a nurse who had worked that desk for 11 years. He'd have to live with that. That was enough. 6 months later, Mercy General passed its federal compliance review. It was the first time in 7 years the cardiothoracic department had received no flags. The new credentialing protocol was cited specifically as a model worth replicating. The nursing director sent Lena a brief email, no celebration, just, "Thank you for what you did here." Lena wrote back 2 sentences, "You did the work, I just took note." And somewhere in a smaller office now, without the department chair title and without the conference room at the end of the hall that had been his for 14 years, Elliot Harmon sat in a standard issue chair and occasionally opened a cardiology journal and read the name on the masthead of the editorial board. He had decided on that Tuesday night, in that hallway, who a woman in thrift store scrubs was, and he had been wrong in every direction, not just about her title and her credentials, but about the more important things. The things that don't appear on a badge, the kind of attention that saves a patient's life at 7:34 a.m., the name of every nurse on a floor she'd never been to before. The way she handed a card to a frightened resident and said, "Call me," like it was the simplest thing in the world. He had looked at her and seen a nobody. He had been looking at the best physician in the building. That was the part he'd carry. Not the administrative leave, not the review, not even the video that still circulated sometimes when people made lists of exactly this kind of story. What he'd carry was the moment she stood in the doorway of that patient's room, quiet and certain, and told him the patient needed the drip adjusted, and she was right, and he was wrong, and she hadn't needed him to admit it to know it. She had simply moved on to the next thing. That was what real confidence looked like. Not louder, not harder, just steady, just past the thing that was meant to stop her without slowing down. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about Lena's story. She walked into that hospital with the credentials to command every room in the building, and she still faced what she faced, because none of those credentials were visible on the outside. Because she wore the wrong shoes. Because she arrived without announcement, without an entourage, without the performance of importance that men like Harmon have learned to read as a signal that someone matters. And she had made that choice deliberately. Because she wanted to see the hospital the way it really was. That's worth sitting with. The story of what happened at Mercy General that night isn't really about Harmon. Men like him are everywhere. They've always been everywhere. The story is about everyone else in that hallway. The residents who looked away, the med student who filmed 12 seconds and didn't know if it was enough, the charge nurse who brought a cup of coffee and said nothing and said everything. We can't all be Lena Calloway. Most of us don't have a badge with 7 titles on it waiting to be flipped over when the room gets it wrong. Most of us, when someone talks to us the way Harmon talked to her, just have to swallow it and go home. But we can be Dr. Chu. We can be Braden. We can be the person in the hallway who decides that what they're watching is not okay and finds whatever way they have, however quiet, however small, to say so. That's the real question I want you to think about. You've been in that hallway. Maybe not that exact one, but a hallway where someone was being dismissed, talked over, treated like they didn't belong before anyone bothered to ask who they were or what they knew. We've all been there, on one side of it or the other. What did you do? Be honest with yourself. Then drop your answer in the comments. I read every one of them, and if Lena's story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or something you've lived, or something you wish you'd done differently, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it. Subscribe to Velvet Verdict for more stories like this one. Stories about the people who get underestimated and what happens when the room finally finds out it was wrong. Because the most qualified person in the building isn't always the loudest one in the hall. Sometimes she's the one in the worn shoes who already knows your name